Hey guys, what's up? It is your friendly neighborhood UberGoose here. I want to talk to you guys today about the new World of Warcraft raid that is Nighthold, of course released in the patch 7.1.5 in World of Warcraft Legion, and let's talk about it. Really quick though, before I actually talk about it, I'm going to explain what you see here. This is a screenshot actually taken from inside Nighthold during the Star Augur Atreus fight. This specific screenshot was taken by the Reddit user Yarmo Perkele, and I know how to pronounce that for reasons I won't go into. But basically, first of all, shout out to that guy. This screenshot's gorgeous, and it is straight from Atreus. And to briefly describe what you were seeing, these are multiple planets in a star system that has been basically completely overcome by the old gods' corruption, or I guess the Void Lords' corruption. If you don't know much about lore, basically Void Lords are the reason that Sargeras, the leader of the Burning Legion, wants to kill every one of us, because basically he sees this sort of shit going on and doesn't want this to happen to a Titan soul. Azeroth happens to have a Titan soul inside of it, so Sargeras wants to blow the Titan soul up and make sure that the Void Lords don't have something incredibly powerful to fight for them. And this is a thing that is currently in our universe in World of Warcraft, because, you know, it's brought up in the Atreus fight. Atreus is the Star Augur. He's an astronomer. So let's talk about Nighthold, though. First of all, I want to talk about things I dislike, because it's a very short list, and we can tear through that shit real quick before I start gushing about the things I do like. And before I actually go too far in, let me explain to you the experience I have with Nighthold so far. Basically on Tuesday, my guild raids Tuesday, Thursday. On Tuesday, we went in. We wanted to go in early before raid time, so not everybody was around. Obviously, we also brought in some people who, pugs, well, mostly friends and stuff like that. So we wanted to do normal, slated about 2.5 hours to do normal. We got most of the way through, 8 bosses down, I want to say, in that time limit, but then we decided to finish out Nighthold for the night. Maybe it wasn't 8 bosses, maybe it was like 6 or 7. The point is, basically, we wanted to finish out normal before jumping into heroic, so we did, in fact, beat Gul'dan on normal, jumped right into heroic, got Scorpion and Chronomatic Anomaly down. Scorpion, we had 1 wipe, Chrono, we had 0 on heroic, and then we wiped 3 times to Trilliax before raid night was over, and then we went back in on Thursday, and we are now 5 out of 10 on heroic with a few wipes on Atreus. I think 5 wipes on Atreus. So that's my experience so far. So a lot of this is going to be from normal, some of it's going to be from heroic. In terms of heroic bosses we have downed, we of course have killed Scorpion, Chronomatic Anomaly, Trilliax, Spellblade, Alluriel, and Croesus, and now we are currently progressing on Atreus. So let's talk about things I dislike. The main thing that I dislike about Nighthold, and this will tell you exactly how much I dislike Nighthold, is the trash. The trash is it's really not interesting. There's nothing really interesting about the trash. There's just one trash pull that really sucks. But other than that, it's really just not a thing that feels like it's there, right? It really doesn't even feel like it's there, which is fine to some degree. I'm personally cool with it. I normally dislike trash in raids, so yeah, it's fine by me. It's just that normally when they're making a excuse me, something just got down my throat. Normally when they're making a raid, they try and do a top-down approach, so thematically everything fits, and trash generally has some mechanics that you have to worry about. In here, not really. A few trash packs have very basic mechanics that you need to do something about, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. There is a mini-boss before Croesus that does need to be handled a bit carefully. He has one of Croesus's abilities, which is nice. I like that sort of thing. I think it's cool. As well as the trash before Scorpion has basically the abilities that the ads in Scorpion have, so that's also cool. It generally works. It's just not very interesting. It's generally an afterthought, I would say. Other than that, there are 2 bosses that I'm not a huge fan of. One of them is Chronomatic Anomaly. I think the mechanics are a cool idea, and I think it is very fun when you get to the speed-up phase. However, it doesn't feel hard. It feels like a loot pinata, to be completely honest with you. Sorry. Basically, we had 0 wipes on him. We one-shot him on normal, one-shot him on heroic. So we like, yeah, we're a mythic raiding guild. Like we were 7 out of 7 mythic for Emerald Nightmare, and then 1 out of 3 mythic. Should have been 2 out of 3 mythic for Trial of Valor. So like, yeah, technically it's not supposed to be hard, but we wiped on other bosses on normal and heroic. But Chronomatic Anomaly just didn't feel hard. There was no difficulty factor at all, really. I think probably the hardest part was having the heals for it, but we were fine. Like we were overhealing it to some degree as well. Like it really wasn't a big deal. So that's mostly why I dislike him, because it just wasn't a difficult fight. Honestly, they could scale up the damage he does on most of his shit, and I'd be like, hell yeah, do that. That's awesome. But I think the mechanics are fine on Chronomatic Anomaly. I think that they're not too interesting. I think that they go a little bit better of a way later in the raid on the next boss I'm about to talk about, and that is Grand Magistrix Elisand. And now, keep in mind, I haven't done her on Heroic, so I think there's a very good chance that on Heroic I will enjoy the fight quite a bit more, and even Mythic I'll enjoy the fight more. But on Normal, it didn't feel like a boss. So if you don't know how Elisand works, she basically has this time mechanic, similar to Chronomatic Anomaly, but it comes from ads, and it only pops up in these little bubbles. And it's a really cool mechanic. I think that mechanic is really, really well done, really well fleshed out. And I think it fits really, really well in general. It's just, I have a problem with the fact that on normal, at least, there weren't other mechanics, right? Like, there was a mechanic where you had to soak falling orbs, and that's it, right? You had 2 ads, you had the ring that comes in from the perimeter, and then you had the falling orbs in phase 2 and maybe 3. I don't even remember. And that's it. Like, that's the fight. There's basically no mechanics on normal, and it's very clear that on heroic and mythic they're going to add mechanics. And I can't wait to see that, but for right now, I don't have a very good impression of Elisand. It felt kind of anticlimactic, because through the entire Suramar storyline, it's like she's being built up to be this horrible villain. And then she even has the villainous trope of not actually dying, right? And I like that. I do think that's a cool mechanic. It's just that it felt anticlimactic. It just kind of felt like, she's dead. Let's go to Gul'dan, right? But anyway, let's talk about things I do like, which is literally everything else. I'm just going to gush about most of this stuff, so strap in. First boss, of course, that we have is Scorpion, and Scorpion's cool. He's not too hard, for sure, at least not on normal or heroic. Our wipe on heroic was simply because our tank, he did not a smart, right? He did a not smart, and he took a shockwave and basically just died to scorpions, and it was too late at that point. Everybody was just falling over to scorpions at that point. So our main tank made a fumble, and that wiped us. But other than that, not really a difficult fight. It's just mechanically it feels really good, and even I guarantee every DPS loves the fight, because there's basically only 2 mechanics that they have to keep in mind. The first one being don't stand in front of the focused blast, or whatever it's called, where it's basically a cone in front of Scorpion. He'll turn to a random person, do a cone. You got to get out of that, because it'll deal damage and stun you. And he always does one right before he does Shockwave, which is the knockback, and that's the other mechanic DPS has to worry about. So if you're caught by that one, you're fucked, basically. I think the ads are cool. I like that he constantly calls in ads, and I think that the room size was done so well, right? Because you feel really claustrophobic, but not just because there's walls next to you, right? Like, there's not these tight walls like on one of the shade fights from either Karazhan. It's not because of the walls, it's because you can't go out of the center of the room, otherwise you pull in more scorpions, right? You're in a scorpion pit. I think that's awesome. I think aesthetically it's great. I think most people enjoy the fight. I, as a healer, enjoy it because I get to actually tank heal. As a resto druid, normally my tank healing is just I have hots on the tanks, and I'll use clear casting procs on them if they're not full health, right? And that's pretty much my tank healing for the most part. But this is a tank healing fight for sure. Obviously, you need a little bit of raid healing. Every time he sheds one of his chitinous plates, you do need to heal everybody. You need to pop everybody up a bit. However, the damage is quite low, so it's not a huge deal. That can honestly probably get handled just by passive healing. Things like Ysera's Gift or Efflorescence for druids, for example. at least on normal and heroic. On mythic, I'm sure it'll deal more, and you'll probably need to actually heal more. And maybe there's even a new mechanic. I haven't looked into mythic yet, mostly because it's not out yet, and I don't want to have that stuff, bouncing around in my brain. But yeah, I think Scorpion's a cool fight. I like him a lot. Next, we have obviously Chronomatic Anomaly. Talked about him. Let's talk about Trilliax. I think Trilliax is cool as well. It's very weird though. He's a very bizarre fight, and there's a bit of like not intuitive gameplay, like a lot of not intuitive gameplay on Trilliax, which is kind of why I like him. But basically the way the fight goes is he has 3 different phases where he does different stuff, and there's also in the 3rd phase he summons adds that do specific stuff, and the adds are not killable in a normal way. So the fight's cool. I think that the 3-phase idea works really, really well, as it being this sort of like protocol sort of thing. Like he's basically like a defense droid. He's not even a defense droid. He's a servant droid, right? And he's just going through these things that he's programmed to do. I think it works from an idea perspective. I think it works really well, and I think it's quite cool. And then I also think mechanically it works pretty well. The fact that there's this arcane seepage, right? He's seeping arcane juice because he was like a broken down robot when we entered the room and was revived by something. I don't really know why he was revived, but he was. So it kind of makes sense that he's spewing out this arcane juice. And I think from a mechanics perspective, I think the toxic slices and their interaction with the ads, I think is awesome. I really, really like the way it works. It's very cool. It's very smart. And it also works as a way to deal raid-wide damage without it just being another lazy, he does a raid-wide damage burst of damage, right? Like, this is a cool way to do that, is kind of manually acquiring raid damage by eating a toxic slice to make sure that this future part works better, right? I think that's a really, really cool concept. I think it was executed really well in this fight. I also think that the beam that he does is really cool, where he jumps to the center and does a beam just all the way around the room and can rotate on heroic and above, like he can switch directions on heroic and above. I think that's a really cool mechanic, and we've had quite a few people die to it due to not noticing that he turned around, which honestly, it boggles my mind because like it's very obvious, but maybe somebody was looking at something else, maybe they were looking at their buttons, or who knows. But the point is, I think it's a cool fight. I think most of the mechanics are pretty cool. Again, it's kind of unintuitive in a lot of ways, but I do like it. I really do. Next, we have Spellblade Illyriel. I didn't understand this fight at all when we did it on normal. We just brute forced it because we had the gear and it worked. On heroic, obviously, we had to learn the mechanics, and I think it's a really cool fight. I think some of the damage needs to be toned down at least a little bit, and that's mostly because I'm anticipating the damage increase into mythic. And I think that the heroic damage levels they're definitely higher than what I would expect. I think if mythic damage levels do the same jump from normal to heroic, and then heroic to mythic, like it's the same gap between them, I think mythic Spellblade is going to be a giant brick wall for a lot of guilds. So I could definitely see the numbers being tweaked a little bit. But I do think that the fight is really cool from a mechanics perspective. She basically will empower her weapons, right, with a different element based on the phase of the fight. She'll start with Frost, then go to Fire, then Arcane. And when she does this, she marks people. Once they're marked, she does a Replicate, so it goes to more people. And then she will do a Detonate, where she'll leave puddles, or in the Arcane one, orbs. And then after the Detonate, she will do Animate, and when she does Animate, it will spawn ads, right? It's very simple. It's debuff, more debuffs, puddles, ads. That's it, and you repeat that process. Every different mechanic, though, every single different combination, right? Like if you look at the Frost debuff, the Fire debuff, or the Arcane debuff, they're all different. In fact, Arcane doesn't actually have a debuff, but it kind of does. And they all do something different, and that's cool. I think the Fire phase is my favorite mechanically. I think Frost is very weird. Frost is a very intense part. for healing, because the way the debuff works is that it constantly stacks this thing that increases the damage from the debuff. It'll tick like once a second or something, and every time it ticks, you take 40% more damage to the debuff, right? And eventually it gets unhealable, and the idea is you collide with somebody else who also has the debuff, and you both lose your stacks, and both of your debuffs jump to 2 other people in the raid who don't have the debuff. And when you also do that, it does raid-wide burst. So the idea is you want to get like 5-ish stacks, collide, it jumps, those new people get 5-ish stacks, collide, it jumps, etc. And if people either collide too much or too little, the healing is super intense, even if they collide, at the perfect time every time, which will never happen. Nobody will ever reach that point. But if it did happen, the healing would still be quite intense. So I think that part is very heal intense. It also gets the ads in the frost phase are also kind of messy. Once we started figuring out that you could actually just tank them, and then we had our DK tank mass grip them in, and then we just unloaded everything onto those ads as soon as they were up, then it started to go a lot better. It was just a matter of, before that, they were kind of running amok, and there were these circles everywhere. And when they make the circle, when they get big and make a circle, they push you away from them if you're inside of it. And if you ever cross the edge of the circle from outside to in or inside to out, either way, you'll get frozen in place, and that freeze is infinite unless you get broken out via damage. So when they're everywhere and you just have circles popping up every which way, lots of people get frozen, lots of chaos, lots of healing required, bad stuff happens. Then we just tried to tank them one time and it worked. So we just did that from then on, and that was fine. The fire phase, I think, is really cool, like I said. I won't explain it too much. It's mostly just cool. I like the way the ads work, where basically they need to be separated from each other. If they're close to each other, they do 200% bonus damage, so 3 times damage per one in range of each other. And they also cast faster. And they do a constantly pulsing AoE, as well as they cast Pyroblast. So everybody basically needs to switch to them and interrupt Pyroblasts, and then it's kind of a heal mechanic at that point with the AoE pulse. But the big part comes where people are detonating. Like during detonate, you want the puddles to be separated, because the ads don't move on their own. So if 2 puddles are too close to each other, both of those ads will have 3 times damage and cast a decent bit faster. And then the arcane, I don't fucking know what's going on there. Listen, I don't know, man. Like, the arcane, I think, is very fiddly. I think the ads might have too much health. Either that, or we had a lot of people trying to skate under the radar and be lazy and not actually swap to the arcane ads. I have no idea what happened, but it felt like it was impossible to kill them all. So we basically just started leaving 3 alive, which was a huge amount of burst to the whole team. Basically, like, when the arcane orbs animate, they do like a 30-second cast. I want to say it's 30 seconds. And when that cast completes, each arcane guy dies during the completion of the cast. However, it also does raid-wide burst for a shitload of damage. On Heroic, it was around 700k. So we basically just got as many as we could down, and then the 3 that were like the most separated, because there was always some that were separated, but the 3 that were the most separated, we were just like, fuck it, ignore that, right? Who cares? And then we all took over 2 million damage in one burst, so then we just healed everybody back up, and it was fine, we moved on. But it felt like they had too much health, to me, but maybe that's kind of the point. I don't really know. It's an okay phase. I think Arcane is fine. It didn't feel as good to get down Arcane phase as it did Frost and Fire. That's my main gripe with it. Move on to Croesus, because this will be basically I'm going my path in Heroic, so I can give you as much info as possible. I think Croesus is awesome. He might be one of my favorite fights mechanically, because it's very simple, right? He is the patchwork fight of the instance, and he's not patchwork, right? When I say the patchwork fight, I just mean he's the fight where DPS can focus most on maximizing their damage, and his mechanics are pretty basic, right? There's not a lot of mechanics, they're pretty basic, and they're cool. I would say he's slightly more mechanic light, slightly more execution mechanic heavy than Ursoc, but slightly lighter overall mechanics. Does that make sense? For DPS, he's about on par with as Ursoc when it comes to how patchworky he is. And he's cool. If you don't know how the fight goes, basically you're on a bridge. It has 4 sections. He does slam every 30 seconds, and it's a thing where if he puts out 2 targeting circles, and if somebody is in it, then that person basically takes a shitload of damage, and then the raid takes a little bit of damage. If nobody's in it, the raid takes a shitload of damage and is bad. So you want each of your tanks to soak one of these circles. On the 3rd slam, he will then break the platform that he's at, the furthest forward platform. So basically nobody wants to be on that platform on the 3rd slam, which means that you have 90 seconds per section, so you have 360 seconds to complete the fight, unless my math is horribly wrong. 4 times 9 would be 36, and then you multiply that by 10, and you get 360. So it's a 6-minute fight at most. You have to kill him before 6 minutes is up. It's not a slow enrage. It's a Guarm enrage, right? It's an enrage where the raid is dead. You've died. Congrats. It's not like Ursoc where he just runs around one-shotting people. It is just instantly, that's it, over. Because the water kills you. If you fall into the water, you die, right? That's the mechanic. So other than that, he has a few mechanics where he shoots a laser beam on one half of the bridge, one lengthwise half of the bridge, so you just go to the other half, that's fine. And then he has this thing called Burning Pitch, which is really cool. I like it a lot, actually. For every 1 player in the raid, there will be a green swirl on the bridge, like a targeting swirl. And for every one of those swirls not soaked by a player, it will spawn an ad that will continually cast until it's dead. So basically, everybody's got to be on point. And also, you can double soak or even triple soak swirls if they happen to be close enough to each other. But in general, people need to not slack. People need to not go, somebody else will get it, right? Because there's 1 per person, right? If you're not soaking one, you're fucking up straight up, right? I think it's a cool mechanic. I do like it. It does mean as a DPS you have to take a break from it. Also, the swirls are across the whole bridge in random locations. So at the start, there's some people that have to go all the way to the back of the bridge, which is way out of range of the boss. So I think it's a cool mechanic. I think the fight just feels good. It's one of those, it's to some degree a gear check. And he has one more thing where he throws a giant fireball at somebody, and it does raid-wide damage depending on how far each individual is away from the explosion. So, for example, if you're standing next to the guy who gets the fireball on him, you're going to die. If you're at the boss and the fireball guy is at the farthest end of the bridge, you're probably going to take basically no damage. And as the bridge shortens, this damage obviously increases because you just have to be closer to the explosion. And that's cool. I think that's a really cool way to make the healing get more intense as the fight goes on, without it just being something boring like a soft enrage, right? Like a 30%, I deal more damage, rah! So that's cool. I think the fight's really, it's nice, it's intuitive, and it's quick. I think it's a cool fight. I love Croesus a lot. And then let's move on to Star Augur, who is the final boss that I have heroic experience on so far. Star Augur Etreus, he has basically 4 phases, but let's call it 3. The first phase only lasts 10% and basically doesn't have mechanics. The second phase is Frost, where he will open up the walls. It's a very tiny room, by the way, but he opens up the walls, and this is basically the skybox. This one's void in the final phase, but the first one is Frost. You see some ice planets. I don't know the lore behind them. I'm waiting on Nobble's video. I have no idea what those are about, but we'll see, I guess, at some point. And by we, I mean, obviously, some people probably already know, and there will probably be a Nobble video about it, and blah, 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 blah. Who cares? So it's a pretty cool phase. On Frost, you want to kind of be huddled together, because on Heroic, there's a new Nova mechanic. When he does Frost Nova, it's kind of like Alluriel, by the way, where he has a set of mechanics that change depending on the phase, right? So it's pretty similar to Alluriel in that way, but yeah, the Frost phase is kind of cool. The tank needs to run a debuff through a group of minimum 3 people, which is cool. And he has to do that 3 different times. So you basically need to have distinct, separated groups of players in different spots. So the tank can going through first group, boom, wait, going through second group, boom, okay, etc. Right? And you just kind of keep doing that. And then the tanks will swap, and the new tank will do the same thing. That's cool. Frost Nova, it'll deal damage to you based on how many people are near you. It'll decrease if there's more near you. So you want to be huddled, right? Huddle for warmth. It's hey, Look at that, isn't that clever? So you just basically want to stay in those groups during the Nova. So pretty simple, pretty cool phase overall. I do quite like that one. And then you have Fel, where he basically opens up the walls again, right? Between phases, the walls close in and then they reopen and you get the skybox. And in Fel, you see what I presume to be Argus, but maybe it's just a different Legion world. But it looks similar to the depictions of Argus that I've seen, so I'm assuming it is Argus. And the Fel one is very chaotic. It's where basically we've had all of our fuck ups on Heroic. People will get a debuff. When you have the debuff, you're basically dropping Fel puddles, similar to Spew Corruption on Il'gynoth. However, the damage is much, much lower than on Il'gynoth. And the difference is that if you run through the puddles, instead of it just being taking damage and a silence, running through the puddles leaves a dot debuff on you, which hurts like hell. So you really don't want to run through them. If you're dropping the puddles, you'd have a solid second before moving. Basically, the puddles drop directly under you, and it takes about a full second for them to form and actually give you the dot debuff, so you have plenty of time if you're dropping them. If you're not dropping them and you're running through them, you're fucked, right? you're gonna die. And that's how I had... Actually, I'm gonna pull up this... Hang on, let me pull up this parse, because you won't see it, but you can find it if you go... If you go on Warcraft logs and search up my character Orto on Mal'Ganis, O-R-T-O on Mal'Ganis, you should be able to find at least the raid night, the log night that we tackled Atreus. But I had, it was a 6.5 minute wipe, and I had 450k HPS, which when I look at the parse, and by the way, we got him to like somewhat low on this attempt, 26%. So we were into the void phase. But if I actually look at how that compares to other people who have completed the fight, it is... it's no longer overall top 1 parse. Damn. But it's still top 1 for my item level bracket, which was 886 to 888. Only a 99% parse now. Obviously, it doesn't count because we didn't kill the boss, but it was funny seeing that number. Because people were taking ridiculous amounts of damage from the Felfire, including me, right? It was a very messy attempt. It was dumb, awful. Anyway. And other than that, his Nova is pretty sweet too. His Nova in Fel is just damage based on how far you are away from the boss. If you're on the perimeter, like run as far as you can, so you're basically running against an invisible wall. If you're running up against the invisible wall, it does like no damage to you. And even if you're like a little bit closer than that, like not quite at the wall, but pretty close, it'll do a shitload. So it very clearly scales heavily as you get closer to the boss. In fact, you probably get one shot even if you're only 3/4 of the way away from the boss to the wall. So, but it's a small room, so it's easy enough to get all the way to the wall. So not a huge deal, but it hurts like hell. And then the final phase in Void, he basically just summons an ad on one of the tanks, and if you don't kill the ad, you're gonna wipe, basically. The ad needs to be focused down. It has quite a bit of health, and it'll periodically cast an uninterruptible ability, and that ability does raid-wide damage, and if you look at the mob when it's doing it, you'll get feared for like 10 seconds. It's awful. You really don't want that to happen. And if the mob and the boss are near each other, they both basically take no damage. They take 99% reduced, which is definitely a theme somewhat recently in raids. On Cenarius, you have something kind of similar with the Thorns mechanic, where if an ad is near Cenarius and you're attacking the ad, then you hurt yourself for half the damage you're doing. Cenarius also has this during ad phases. And then on Odin, when the ads are either near each other or near Odin, both of those things take a shitload of reduced damage. So it makes sense. You know, it's a thing that they like to use a lot, and you know it works in this fight. I think it's a good one, especially because the room is so tiny. So the range is quite close for them to take reduced damage. So there's that. I think Atreus, again, aesthetically is one of the greatest fights because you get these glorious skyboxes, which give you a peek into the secrets of the universe that are in plain sight as long as you have a telescope, basically, which is fucking cool. I love that. So let's move on to the next guy. This is probably the next boss we're going to tackle on Heroic, which would be High Botanist tel'arn. On normal, we kind of brute forced it. We fucked up a lot of mechanics, but he's a cool fight. My favorite mechanic, I'll make this one brief because the fight has a lot of stuff going on. But I'll talk about my favorite one specifically. Periodically throughout the fight, a selection of people will get a debuff, which is dispellable, and once dispelled, it will spawn an ad, a plant ad, and that ad will be fixated on a random player. And if the plant ad ever catches that player, it'll attack them, obviously. And when it attacks somebody, when a plant attacks a person, it will give them the same debuff that the plant came from. So they will continue to propagate unless they are killed. They can be CC'd, they can be slowed, everything, right? You can do everything to them. So the main important factor is, 1, healers have to dispel really fast. 2, ranged DPS need to nuke those fuckers real hard. And 3, you want to probably CC so the person who's fixated doesn't have to, lose sleep over how fast they have to run away, right? So I think that mechanic's really cool, and it also fits with like the plant theme. I think the room looks really good, except for the part where there's a fucking translucent texture on the floor, and it kills my frame rate, and I do not understand why. It is so annoying to me, because anywhere else in the room, I'm fine, right? I can have like 60 plus FPS without any troubles. If I am on that center plate, which you really should be fighting the boss on that center plate, my frame rate is like 20 FPS. I actually had to turn down the render scale to minimum to 50% just to actually have like playable FPS once the fight had actually started. So awful garbage. I hope they figure that out and fix it. Maybe there's like 10 plates of glass all together in the same spot accidentally. I don't know the cause of it, but that spot specifically drops my FPS heavily, and people with good computers are corroborating basically the same story. So hopefully they look into that and fix it, but oh well. Let's move on to the final boss prior to the Elisand and Gul'dan, and that is Tichondrius. Yes, we do fight Tichondrius, not in the Twisting Nether, so I mean he's probably still alive somewhere, but Tichondrius is pretty cool. I think mechanically it's pretty straightforward. He's a pretty hefty ad fight. So I'm sure a lot of these fights are ad fights, by the way, so a lot of AoE classes are kind of they're what's the word I'm fucking looking for, dude? They seem stronger than they would in a different raid, right? Classes that have heavy AoE are at more of a benefit from this raid than others. Make sense? Whatever. So Tichondrius is a pretty hefty ad fight. He's constantly spawning these little oozes that need to be away from him, because if they're next to him, they lifesteal. So it becomes much harder to kill them. You need to deal way more damage because they're constantly getting health back. So you need to pull him away from Tichondrius. He starting in, I guess you could call it phase 3 or phase 1 again, whatever. He starts spawning a bunch of Nightborn ads as well as a Inquisitor ad. Those in all cases, ads need to get focused down really quick. So that's kind of a big deal. And then there's this middle phase in phase 2 where everybody goes to this like a dreamlike place, and he does kind of like the Black Rook hold thing where he shoots a laser through the center of the room from a random spot in the room. Although that laser takes a long time to go, so it's only like one, they're spaced out by like 5 seconds or so each. So it's much less quick than Black Rook hold, thank God, because you have to kill these bats. And when you kill the bats, they drop an orb. For every person who picks up the orb, they get a debuff, which is more of a buff, that increases their damage, healing, and mana regen by 1%. And you use those orbs to basically burn Tichondrius, because he actually has a somewhat important, somewhat tight enrage timer. At least on normal, it kind of felt that way when we did it the first time. We did wipe on him on normal, mostly because people didn't pick up the orbs, I think. And we did hit the enrage. So I think that he's a pretty cool fight. He has some other mechanics. I won't go too in depth. One of them is a pretty nice healer mechanic, the plague or whatever. I think that one's really good. You can look into it yourself. It's a cool mechanic. I like it. And then we have Elisand, which again, she's cool, but just felt kind of like it was missing something. Like there was a spot the mechanics should have been that they just weren't, right? And then the Gul'dan. I could make an entire video on Gul'dan. Let me just tell you that it is incredible. I think the aesthetics, the mechanics, And the fact that we get an alternate action button in a fucking raid fight, and it's good, and it's a personal sort of responsibility thing, except for the healer one, I think it's really cool. I just love the fight. I really love Gul'dan. I can't wait to see him on Heroic. I really can't. I am so excited to see that fight on Heroic and Mythic. I think it'll be awesome. So that's pretty much my thoughts on Nighthold. One more final remark. I think the entire Nighthold is gorgeous. I think it is one of the best looking raids that they have ever released. And outside of those incredibly few negative things I've stated in this video, I love it. I think everything is so good. This is the perfect end to the first tier for Legion. I think that as a whole, I think Legion is, if they maintain the status quo of current Legion through until the end of the expansion, it will easily be the best expansion World of Warcraft has ever had. It's a matter of them maintaining that, right? They've got it. They've captured magic. They just need to just finish it out, right? They need to keep that going. But that's pretty much it. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I love talking about this place. I love gushing about it. And if you want to check out my logs, again, they're on Warcraft logs. They're public logs. I am Orto on the realm Melganis, Resto Druid, and I got some pretty good gear out of this place so far, I'll tell you that. So that's pretty much it. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.